What's up, brother? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to the Conversation, the Mike Muse Show. I am so excited to be in conversation with this guest I have coming up. I had the chance to meet him at the White House recently when we were there to celebrate the Golden State Warriors national championship win and got into a really great conversation with them. And so I'm so happy that I get the chance to expand upon that conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome the Secretary of Education, Secretary Miguel Cardona. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Good to see you, Mike. Good to see you again. I have to say, the last time we met, we had Steph Curry, Draymond Green around us. It was a pretty cool vibe. But if you could see right now, I'm at an elementary school. So for me, this is like a championship day for me. I'm around kids.
I love that. I even love the background that you have right now, right? It makes it so festive. We don't have time, but I always engage my subjects with their background. And I actually learn so much about the subjects, about the background that they have. And we usually have the most fascinating conversation. So at another time, we have to come back when you're in another school and we'll talk about everything. Let's just get to it. I don't have much of you. My audience knows, Mr. Secretary, that education is my priority. I talk about education on my platform weekly. I write op-eds about this, in particular literacy, from terms of Black and brown boys being able to read proficiently by the end of third grade, going into fourth grade, and how, if they're not, how that can more than likely put them on the school to prison pipeline. And so for me, education is centered to everything that we're doing. Right. How do you look at that? That reading literacy gap that we're seeing within Black and brown boys in particular, and then how are you thinking about ensuring that gap decreases?
No, thanks for that, Mike. Look, I come from a community where 75% of the students qualify for free or reduced lunch, right? A lot of Black and brown students where I come from, struggle to read on grade level. And, I noticed by high school that, and then when I went to college, that I was, unfortunately, in many cases, a counterexample. Yet, in my opinion, the students that I went to school with had just as much talent and ability as I did. So I experienced it as a student, these gaps in achievement. When I became a fourth grade teacher, a school principal, I recognized that we've become almost insensitive to the fact that Black and brown children are performing 20, 30 points less than their white peers across the country. We've normalized that, Mike. So when I became Commissioner of Education in Connecticut, I was like, that's what I want to focus on. And we were doing that. And then the pandemic hit, right? And then it got worse. So now as Secretary of Education, there's nothing at the Department of Education that we do that's not focused on addressing inequities that were made worse by the pandemic, but that have been normalized in this country. And I use the words of Dr. Pedro Noguera, who talks about normalization of failure. We've normalized gaps in learning. And what this administration is about, and what we're doing at the department, is being very intentional to address that.
And I'm having a lot of conversations about reimagining education. I'm about to go on a national tour coming up this summer in the fall. And part of that is creating safe spaces for Black and brown men, but reimagining public safety, reimagining urban planning, and reimagining education. As we address this reading gap that we're seeing and experiencing, knowing that reading is so fundamental, because after you get to fourth grade, your math problems go from just digits to actually words, right? You and the cat went down the street with $1. You get a bottle of water, 3/4 are left, right? So it becomes more complicated in terms of the comprehension aspect of it. And so in the sense of reimagining like education, how do you reimagine the way that curriculums are set in our public school education so that it isn't a one size fits all?
First of all, Mike, I got to say I'm impressed with your understanding of how that transition happens, right? Because you're right. Math becomes solving word problems. And if you don't understand what they're asking you, you're not going to solve it. So reading is critical. Look, at the Federal Department of Education, we don't mandate curriculum, but what we do is provide dollars so that districts like the one I'm in today, I'm in Columbus, Ohio right now. I just walked out of a first grade classroom, which is why the background is so beautiful.
You saw me laugh right there just now when you said Columbus, Ohio. My audience knows I went to the University of Michigan. And so we do not like Columbus, Ohio. So my audience knows that. So every time somebody says Ohio or Columbus, my audience knows I'm going to have a reaction to it. So continue as you were.
That's hilarious. So I just walked out of a first grade classroom where they were doing decoding and they were following the science of reading, right? And they're making sure that their kids can read I was in a kindergarten classroom where kids were putting sentences together already. I think there's a renewed emphasis on literacy and numeracy. At the Department of Education, we have this thing called We're Raising the Bar. We're focusing on literacy and numeracy, making sure that our kids have the fundamentals. We can't talk about career pathways if our kids can't read. We can't talk about STEM education if our kids can't read. So this renewed focus on literacy and making sure our students are reading and following the science of reading is happening across the country. I'm in Ohio. I was talking to the chancellor of New York City schools earlier this week, and his focus on reading and making sure that kids can read. We all have to wrap our arms around this important focus on making sure our kids are reading.
Knowing I only have 12 minutes with you, there's so much more I wanted to unpack with you regarding this subject. So I hope you will find time to come back. So I want to do more of a deep dive. Definitely. Just for a background perspective, so you know a little bit more about me. So I went to University of Michigan. I'm an industrial engineering degree major, and I did 4 years in chemical research. So for me, STEM is at the center of this. And then I use that, my media platform, in order to advocate for that. Since we're there, career pathways, let me just get to this next point I've been thinking about. And just so you know, Secretary, these are all data points just from my lived experience, right? And so I have friends of mine of all different types. And so one of the friends of mine that I have, when she was growing up, we used to sit on the stoop in Brooklyn and we would do riddles, right? And at the time she was about 5 years old, 6 years old. Now she's at about 9 years old. And so now what we do now is logic games, right? And so for us, that is fun for her. But I see that not only with her, with so many of my other friends, the advancement, right, of what they are learning in their schools and the rate to which they are learning. My concern is we talk a lot about the economic gap in the nation, but we're not really addressing the educational gap that is about to exist in about 10 to 15 years. I know federal government doesn't mandate and create curriculums, but how are you guys thinking about, you know, moderating discourse to really think about how to prepare our K through 5, right, K through 8th grade, to be competitive with those students who are learning logic and doing games and doing STEM in their classes? I have another friend of mine, his daughter is doing STEM classes, coding, in the 2nd grade.
Yeah, well, you know, while we don't mandate curriculum, there's no national curriculum, right. We work very closely with states and we make sure that they have dollars. Like, for example, I just spent 3 hours or 2.5 hours the other day pushing forward the president's agenda that's pushing for Title I dollars to make sure that Title I schools, which are schools that serve students that are have less resources, have the reading teachers that they need, the STEM teachers that they need. You know, I think oftentimes what happens is in less resource communities, you don't see STEM teachers. You don't see, experiential learning that you might see in the well-resourced suburbs or the affluent districts. They don't have science coordinators in Title I districts because they're trying to focus on having classroom teachers and they're not paid as well. So they're dealing with substitutes back and forth. So if you look at our budget, it's focusing on giving those schools the dollars that they need to hire the science person, to hire the reading teacher, to make sure that we're giving our students an equal opportunity at those careers that are coming, the degrees that they're capable of getting early on. So yeah, the curriculum piece is critical, and we do work with states on making sure standards are high, on monitoring gaps in learning. We look at their achievement data, and we have different levels of distinction if districts are underperforming or states are underperforming, or if there's a historical track of subgroups of students underperforming, we're on it, right? And but yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Look, focusing on K-5, we need to build a strong foundation. We need to make sure our schools are resourced, and we need to make sure we're hiring highly qualified teachers. You know what happens, Mike? You know this, but in our urban centers where our teachers are being asked to do so much more and they're getting paid $10,000, $15,000 less, that's how we create gaps. When we have in more affluent districts, teachers making a lot more, they have more support in their schools. We have to level the playing field. And that's why our budget proposes more Title I dollars to give those schools a fighting chance, because those kids are just as talented as the kids in the other areas. Because I was one of those kids. And there were so many of my colleagues growing up that they didn't have the same opportunities that I had. And it's unfortunate. Think about the potential of this country if we can tap on the shoulders of all of our kids and tap into their potential.
I love that. That's what I wanted to get in the sense of what is happening. So I love that Title I is there. And so I'm going to have now a larger conversation with the audience about Title and how we can ensure there's more funding for that. But really, how do we make sure we draw down equitably when the dollars are allocated towards the states to make sure that we have that? Since we're here and we're focused.
Let me comment on that really quickly. One of the things that we wanted to make sure, we put out $130 billion in the last 3 years with the American Rescue Plan dollars to address educational inequities. And to make sure stakeholder engagement was a part of the process. On our website, ed.gov, there's a parents checklist. I want to share this because, look, we want to empower our parents to ask the right questions when they go to the board meetings. So that question is...
Yes, I talk about this all the time, sir. I'm about solutions. I look at
how is the money that you're getting helping my child with a disability? How is the money you're getting helping my child who's not reading at grade level? So there's a parent checklist there. Check it out, share it, plug it, put a code out there so people can see it, use it.
I'm doing that. I want to end with you with this idea of choice, right? There's a narrative out there that college isn't for everyone. I'm not here to debate that, right? But in looking at the way the economic gap, I feel, is widening, looking at the way that college universities admission rates are really focusing on the yield rate, my audience already knows about this, and how it's more difficult to get into certain schools, and how with certain schools, maybe individuals reach schools, those other students who may have gone a tier higher are now getting enrolled into those schools. And so it's just making this domino effect of getting into college that's much more difficult. I'm curious, understanding I want to qualify everything. Understanding the federal government doesn't mandate curriculum. Understanding the federal government doesn't have control of hiring, firing. With the K through 12 public school system, how is the Department of Education thinking in moderating discourse, looking at research, maybe allocating dollars to do research on the role of guidance counselors? I just feel like the guidance counselors don't get enough accountability. And why I say that is 2 data points from my real life experience. My niece, 3.5, marching band, AP classes, all the things. I made a joke with her, like, oh, clearly you're going to go to the University of Michigan. She said, no. To speed the story along, she said the guidance counselor told her that her best chance for secondary education was community college only. With that being said, my pastor in my hometown church called me up one day.
You're trying to get me mad.
I'm just saying. And so
my pastor called me.
This is why I want to talk with you. My pastor of my home church, I'm not going to give too many details about my home church. We do a senior salute. High school students go cap and gowns, college students cap and gowns, and then the high school students state where are they going to school. He said 12 seniors from my high school got up there. All 12 of them said they were going to community college. There's nothing wrong with community college. I love that as an option and toolkit. My concern is where the guidance counselors are providing choice and empowering the students with choice. You talked about expectations and excellence in some other talks I've heard you talk about. I feel like the expectation is so low when it comes to Black and brown students. And also, too, I think choice is taken away from them. Is there any conversations about how to hold guidance counselors accountable into a standard of excellence too as well? Understand they have a lot to do.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And I thank you. Look, I think in many places, and as a former student, people have asked me, what's the toughest thing to become Secretary of Education? A culture of low expectations at different parts of my life. I could have a doctorate and I'm still looked at as the Latino guy. Right? So I hear you. We are trying to double the number of school counselors because the ratios right now are like 500 to 1. It's crazy. So the reality is your niece is probably not getting the attention that she needs to have the options laid out. But I also think we need to do a better job making sure that our counselors have shared lived experiences as our students. So we're trying to diversify the pipeline, and we put grants to make sure that we have pipeline programs to get school counselors and teachers from diverse backgrounds so that their shared experience could tell that student, it doesn't matter your zip code, you have the potential to go here. And I think, so yes, on the counselor guidance and making sure that we're looking at every student for their potential, but we also need to diversify the profession. We need people like your niece or like us who have had our lived experience to say, don't let anyone take you down a notch. You're capable of this. You can do this. Believe me, there are teachers that lift up and I was tapped on the shoulder, but there's also sometimes cultures of low expectations that we need to be bold and unapologetic about confronting in education, or else we're never going to make a difference.
Awesome.
That part, and put a boy, I'm ending, and to put a bow on that, is she ended up enrolling into the 4-year institution of her dreams as a result of that conversation that she and I have had. Secretary, I love talking with you. I hope you'll come back when we have more time to unpack so much more of these layers, brother.
We got to do this much more, and I appreciate the depth that you're taking to this. It's a great conversation. I look forward to seeing you again in the future.
No, it's a core of my platform, my show. All right, Secretary. Have a good day, buddy. Bye-bye.